Welcome to The Fully Lived Life, a podcast for those who are longing to pursue the full life and want to break free from anything that holds them back. Listen in as two friends, a psychologist, Dr. Mary, and a life coach, Gillian, talk about life, love, and purpose through the lens of faith, science, psychology, and life experiences.
All right. Oh my gosh.
Well, that's a way to start off.
I know. Well, first of all, I have so missed seeing you.
I know.
It's just been too long.
It has been too long.
Yeah.
And actually, we were away with our friends on a retreat. But, you know, when there's other people around too, your time is divided between everybody.
Yeah.
So I don't really feel like we caught up with each other even then.
No, we didn't. We didn't have a good sit down over a glass of wine and just kind of, yeah. So I'm glad to see you. But we've been talking about this is hard to do this remotely, that we might have to think about organizing, getting in person to do this. We're not that far away. We might have to make it happen.
We might, because I think it's like our energy is better placed when we're with each other.
That's so true.
And we can troubleshoot all the technical stuff together because, it just takes so much out of us to kind of do it. Yeah. And then be on when the camera goes on finally. Exactly. And I think there's something about being in the same room. My goodness, I'm hungry to be in the same room with you. How's that sound?
Yeah. I would say the same thing. And I know that, well, I don't know. How have you been doing? Like, catch me up on life. I feel like we just need to kind of let people in on where we're at.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I've been slogging through mud. There's been a lot going on in the background. My son and daughter-in-law just moved back from BC to Toronto. And my sister-in-law, we lost my brother-in-law a couple of months ago. Right. My sister-in-law is heading down to Florida this coming Friday. So we're trying to catch up with her before she goes. Mm-hmm. And there's just a lot of things that still feel so weird in our virtual, non-virtual context. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like things are starting to get normal, but not really getting normal. Mm-hmm. And I think I feel like I'm in this in-between world.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. You know, what's interesting is when I asked how you're doing, you talked about the stuff that's happening around you. And that may actually be an indication of part of the challenge is because you're in this place of the unknown. Mm-hmm. And yet people around you are kind of transitioning, moving around. And it's like there's nothing to anchor onto.
Yeah. And for me, I love to have something dangling in the future. Yeah. Like I like to have a trip or an event or something. And there's nothing at the moment dangling for me. Mm-hmm. And so it just feels like this weird time and space that's just so unpredictable, but getting predictable all at the same time. I don't even know how to describe it. That might be like gobbledygook.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's the challenge is like we're in this place of not knowing, this place of waiting, and we're still trying to make sense of it. We're still trying to come up with words to describe it, and we can't. And I remember a week ago, I had been reading the passage in the Bible. I can't remember which one because that's already passed in my brain. But I remember the part that stuck out to me was that the Greek word for wait is the same as grief. That is interesting.
Yeah.
Because you've commented a few things like there's this change happening around you. You've lost a dear family member. You're kind of in this nothing to look forward to in terms of trips. And so, yeah, we can call it waiting, but maybe there is grieving too. And is that kind of the season we're in? And is that okay to give ourselves permission to feel that?
Yeah. I think maybe trying to put words to it causes my brain to hurt. So maybe it's just better to do what we're told to do all through scripture, is kind of sit in it for a while, like sit in it and sit with it.
Yeah.
And because sometimes our brains are trying to sort it out, fix it, problem solve it.
Control
and maybe
it.
there's a time where we just don't even need to do any of that. We just need to sit in it.
Yeah, I think
And
so.
I mean, I'm sure most listeners go, I don't like the sitting waiting. I don't like the sitting in it.
Yeah.
I need to be doing something. I need to be fixing it. I need to be managing it. And maybe the sitting in it is just a new season that I'm in. Ugh.
I know. Well, we are going to be talking in the next few episodes about this whole thing, because we often don't want to feel the pain of whatever that you're sitting in is. And so we distract ourselves. We call them drugs of choice, right?
Yeah.
So we'll talk about that different one. This episode is just for us to be transparent as we check in with each other. And I know that's, you've been in this waiting for some time now. And so I appreciate that you're being honest about not having clarity, not even having words, and just, feeling.
What about you?
I was feeling pretty tired for a while because I do this to myself, where I got myself pretty busy. But I was very fortunate, before we had our group retreat together, I'd spent 3 days on my own. And it was really, really, oh my gosh, my soul really needed it. It was humbling as well. So, you'd mentioned that sometimes our brain is trying to make sense of how we're feeling, where we're at, and we kind of go into this problem solving mode. Well, that's what I usually do in my retreats. And the Lord just wouldn't let it happen. He was kind of going, how's that working for you? You do this annual retreat and you find yourself in the same place a lot of times. How's it working for you? So, so having, in that time, let myself just feel how I was feeling, because I had the sense too that there was a grieving. 2021 has been a year of tons of transition for me, from moving home to moving my work to letting my last child go. And I'm generally a very optimistic person, and I can see the good in things. So I don't think I gave myself space. And you had kind of given me a little bit of a heads up when you said, as I'm praying for you, I'm getting this sense that you're supposed to stay in it and you're supposed to let yourself grieve. I'm like, I don't want to grieve.
I know. And you didn't want to hear that from me, but
no, I got a little bit, my back got up a little bit. That's just like, okay, fine. But sure enough, I actually spent the first day in a lot of tears. And I don't typically do that because, so part of what I came to realize is I have this lie, and I've shared this before, but I didn't realize how deeply it was affecting not just my relationship with friends, but also with my husband and with God, is this difficulty letting down my guard and just letting myself weep and weep and weep. So it was a very sad day. I didn't enjoy it at all. And so normally when I do these retreats, I am completely on my own and I don't have any conversations with any people. And then by the time I see people like my husband or my friends, my 3 days are done. So everyone's just getting the summary version of it. You're not actually entering it with me. But this is the first time, because normally I would come out to the lake that we're living here full time, that Peter was around. And although he respected my space and all that, we still had interactions. So at the end of day one, I had gone out for a walk and I was feeling really sad. And I kind of cried my way through the walk. And when I came back, I just kind of hid in my corner. And for some reason, and he's very respectful of my boundaries, because I told him I'm doing this retreat. He came in and he goes, is everything okay? And of course, I just couldn't control it anymore. So I was a mess. And I kind of cried my way through. And I have to say, I babbled. It did not make any sense whatsoever what I was saying, because I was just as well of emotions.
Yeah.
And he just sat there, and I could tell looking in his eyes that he didn't really understand it on a rational level, but his heart was feeling it because he had tears in his eyes as he just listened to me. And he rubbed me on my leg. And at the very, very end, he says, just wanted to let you know, I'm getting emotional thinking about it, that I love you very, very much. And the thing is, I wouldn't normally have been that vulnerable with him.
Yeah.
And on my walk, I had said to the Lord, can you just send me tangible signs of your love for me? And this is what he does. Because my lie, when I was growing up, my dad teased me all the time of being a crybaby. It was a source of shame. And I had made the vow to stop doing that. And certainly in front of men, I just do not like to cry. And my husband included, I'll cry quietly to myself. And then he gets the conclusion of it. The fact that I was just like sobbing and he had no judgment and that he loved me was so healing. So what I came to realize was that my desire to kind of keep it all together and not show my vulnerability was preventing me from experiencing that heart transforming love, that tangible sense of love that I needed.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So,
and I just want to touch on a couple of things, because often, isn't it the truth that as women, many of us have made the vow that we're not going to cry, especially in front of men even in a professional setting, because that's one of our worst fears, right? Is it will seem weak or needy or whatever it might be.
Oh, yeah.
And we also often cry alone. And where did that message come from? And then we do give our loved ones this sanitized version of ourselves.
Yeah.
So that they do think on the surface that everything's kind of okay. She's had a good cry. She's got it out of her system. It's all good now. Whereas it's not really.
No. And then because we aren't being vulnerable, then we're not inviting the people that we know love us into our deepest part of our journey, which then we feel the lack of it. And then we can say, see, like, it's not possible. It's not going to work. And by just that experience, it helped me to feel it. I mean, I know in my head that my husband's safe, but to feel that I could be messy and he still loves me. In fact, he was very empathetic and extra loving. So all that to say, I mean, it's a very long answer to you asking about how I'm doing, is that, so in many ways I'm in a good place, but I would say I'm in a I'm much more and more aware of how unfinished I actually am. And then that's okay. So by day 3, when I was asking God for solutions, he was like, I'm not going to give it to you, because this is not about problem solving. This is about remaining in my love. This is about just letting yourself really soak in how much you are loved. And it's not about your performance. It's not about what you do. It's just the fact that you are loved. And that, I think that's the challenge when you and I are chatting here. I mean, we obviously want to give people sage advice. We want to give them guidance. And I think that's helpful. But I think we also want to invite people to kind of embrace the mess and to invite others into it. So part of why I'm sharing that is to encourage our listeners and our viewers to do the same.
Yeah. And I just, at the beginning of our time together, even today, I was kind of scrambling for words. And I remember we referenced this in a previous episode where Adam Grant, who's a social psychologist, put out this post about the word of the pandemic being languishing. And it hit a chord and just kind of blew up, right? His writing about languishing, because people actually had a word that they could hang on and go, oh yeah, that's what I'm like. And maybe we're in this new season where there's a word out there to describe this kind of space where we don't need to solve it, but we need to sit in it. And it's not quite languishing. But it's something else.
I think it's a very healthy thing. It's a self-honesty I was listening to the Mars Hill podcast, the one that's talking about what led to its crash and burn. I mean, it's a better title than that. And I was just thinking about the pastor they were talking about. Like, you can tell he started his journey with a genuine love of God and a genuine desire to change the world for God. And I think to this day, I'm sure that's still his core self. And I'm sure he still believes that. But because of an unwillingness or a fear of going into those deep, dark places within his soul, around his fears, because I could hear how much of his actions are driven by fear and self-protection, how that has taken his ministry down, and unfortunately, a whole entire church.
Exactly.
So whatever we call this, and maybe we can still noodle on it for a little bit, I think that it's actually such important work that we do. And
so here's a good question I think that's coming up for me and for you is what are the forms of self-protection that we use to stop us from sitting in the space? And then what are the things that we do to protect others from seeing us navigate the space?
That's a tough question right there. I mean, I'm looking at it. If I go to the whole science end of it, the reason why we feel self-protective is because we're afraid, which means we feel threatened. So what are the typical ones? Fight, flight, freeze, please. And then there's the, what's that one? Fawn? It's
That's
now
right.
called.
Could you just expand on that one? Because I know for the fight, we understand, the flight, we understand, the appease, pleasing others, appeasing others, being compliant. Expand on the fawn again, because I think that's a new term for a lot of people.
Well, I think fawn is just because they went fight, freeze, flee, fawn. So fawn actually does mean about people pleasing and, the trying harder. That's what we do. The sucking up to whomever we think has power over us. Yeah. So, if we can see that the survival has been triggered and fear is the root of it, what are we afraid of? And just being able to be honest with that. So for me, as I go back to what it is, I'm afraid of being judged. I'm afraid of being rejected. I'm afraid of shame. So if I let myself be vulnerable with my emotions and talk about my needs, my emotional needs, I'm afraid that I'm going to be abandoned. I'm going to be rejected. I mean, that's the core for me.
Yeah. And for me, the fear is a fear of vulnerability. That would then look like weakness. Like I don't have it together. I can't control things. I can't control myself. So, what else am I capable of handling? So for me to be vulnerable, it kind of flies, or that fear of being vulnerable flies in the face of what I actually need to do. Like, how can you be your real self if you can't be vulnerable? Right. And if I put all those self-protective layers around myself, where, I cry in the car on the way home from the drive-through Tim Hortons, but I kind of sniff and walk in the door like everything's fine. Right. Like, what am I protecting myself from? And what am I actually protecting my loved ones from?
Exactly.
That they don't even know what's really maybe going on deep inside me, because I do sort of suck it all up and only show them the sanitized version.
Exactly. Yeah. And then that just reinforces that aloneness that you feel when you're struggling as well. The other thing I was wondering is, just given you being 8 on the Enneagram and how you have access to anger, that when you feel angry, what is the anger protecting you from?
Yeah. That could be a whole episode in itself, quite frankly.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example.
Sure.
Yesterday, I was driving in our area, and there's, a protest every weekend about vaccinations and the vaccine passport. And I was feeling myself getting so angry, like just wanting to yell out the window. And I was like, what is that? And it wasn't about the people.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't about them having a right to protest.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't about them having a right to their feelings and their thoughts. What it was about was this fractured world that I feel like I'm living in more and more, where there's a right side and a wrong side, and there's no movement for understanding.
Yeah. Oh.
And it was really like, fortunately, I had a little bit of a drive after I passed him. I was by myself, and I was like, where on earth is all this anger coming from? And that's where it was from. It was this right versus wrong. You're right, I'm wrong, or you're wrong, I'm right. And this black and whiteness that we're moving towards, that I kind of thought we were more in a gray world for quite a while there, where there was more acceptance of others' views. There was more compassion and empathy for other. And I think my anger is about that because, for the 8, justice is a big thing. Especially when it pertains to the vulnerable. So that was really getting me amped up.
Interesting. Yeah. How does that, like, as you personalize it, because you're very good at identifying anger on behalf of fighting for others or justice. But maybe, I guess, the deeper layer for you as we talk about sitting in our mess or in the uncomfortable, if it's anger, like, how does that relate to your core fear or struggles or sadness or grief?
Oh, you know what? I'm at a place where I can't even touch the surface of that one, Mary.
Okay.
Because if I do, it's like too raw.
Okay. All right. Well, appreciate you.
And I'm just being respectful of myself where I'm at.
Yeah.
And because it is too raw. And I think our listeners will get that. There's just some times where you're too much in it.
Yeah.
That if you start to talk about it, it won't be good. It won't be good for anybody because it's just too raw to even go there.
Yeah. No,
does that make sense?
Yeah, totally does. And I think this is again being comfortable with the mess, that you can say that and also to feel like it is about your mess and your important boundaries that you have to set for yourself, and to give yourself grace and space so that it's not like a one and done thing. Like, this is going to be a season for a while for a variety of different reasons. And that's okay. Yeah. No, I appreciate you being honest about that.
And I liken it to, when someone's gone through a recent grief, a recent loss of a loved one.
Yeah.
And we ask them, how are you? Like, they can't even begin to describe how they really are.
Yeah.
Because it's just so multi-layered, multi-leveled. We just passed the 10-year mark in my family. November is a tough month for us. My mother died in November, but my sister-in-law, Iris, died. And then, like, 2 weeks later, my nephew died in the same month. So November is packed for us.
Yeah.
But even 10 years later, listening to my brother process some of his grief, it's one of those things that I think when it affects us, that anger or whatever it might be, whatever it is for the Enneagram numbers, it takes a long time and lots of unpacking of layers to get through. And sometimes the layers are just they're just too tightly packed together that you can't do one without all of them coming.
Right. Gotcha.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, I think you articulated that beautifully, actually, Gillian. And, we have a certain picture of how vulnerability should be. And it seems like people think that it means you have to let it all hang out, that you have to be like, if you're guarding your privacy or the fact that you don't actually have answers or clarity, and so therefore you don't even know what to share, that's not actually a lack of vulnerability. That's actually incredibly vulnerable and honest, because you're not going with the expectation that, no, I'm supposed to tell my story, or I'm supposed to share this, or whatever it might be. Right.
Yeah.
And then to acknowledge that, that if you were to kind of go down that road, it could get pretty messy, and you're just not ready or prepared for that at this point.
Yeah. And I think we've encouraged our listeners to have safe people, to have boundaries. And so you got to live it too, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, there's nothing a little bit more vulnerable than putting yourself out there on not only audio, but video. And it's kind of for perpetuity.
Right.
So I think, listeners, you might be in a place where you're like us, Mary, that day where you're just kind of blubbering because it's there's so much there that you can't even unpack it and spell it out articulately. That's okay. Do it with a safe person, though, as she did it with Peter and with some trusted friends. And if there are parts of that rawness of your journey that are they're just too linked to some other stuff in your life that you just can't process at the time out loud, find someone safe to process it with. Take the time with it. You might have to sit with it for quite a while. But that's when, we do invite you, if you're a Christ follower, to invite Jesus into the process and not be alone with it, but processing it with the person that you trust most, who is the person of Jesus Christ for us. So, and, lean in friends. You don't have to tell your friends everything. There's things I shared with something, Mary, with her the other day, and I just said, that's kind of enough. I sort of drew the boundary line, and I knew that she'd be okay with it. So I hope that we're modeling that for you, viewers and listeners. I hope that we're modeling the vulnerability appropriately, but also as we work through it.
Exactly. And I would add too, if you've got this, like Gillian says, many, many, many layers, chances are there's some trauma in that. And that as you start to tap in, if it's big and scary, please do this with the help of a professional.
Absolutely.
Part of the thing when I do work with people with trauma recovery, we spend the first part of it, first of all, just building trust in our relationship that I'm safe, but also helping them be safe with themselves, giving them strategies to ground themselves, to be able to manage their own emotions when they get dysregulated. And those are really, really important skills. So we don't share this because we're telling you to just open up like a wound and just poke away at it. It's the balance of being able to be honest with how you're feeling, to be able to share that with trusted people, but not have to have it all figured out or all the answers, and recognize that you're on a journey. And frankly, this side of heaven, this is the journey that we're on. There's always going to be deeper layers that we're trying to sort out. So just to kind of continue on with what happened with my retreat time on day 2, I was feeling pretty good. When I woke up in the morning, I had cried. I didn't make much sense of it other than this sense of grieving because of loss and kind of coming out of that and looking forward to whatever the new. So I'm all kind of chipper and I feel like, okay, I'm going to go on a walk. I went on a walk and I was on this path completely on my own. And I got to see this beautiful bald eagle come down so close to me. Like I could see the details of him. It was beautiful. And I was like, just in awe. So I'm like, so looking forward to this time. Then I walk further and I walk further. Now he's flown away, this eagle. And then right away, all of a sudden the thought strikes me. You forgot to tell anyone you're going on this walk and you're completely on your own. If somebody attacks you, like no one's going to know where you are. And immediately fear hit me. And of course, I'm like trying to talk myself out of it. But this is again where I'm healthier, where I was able to acknowledge that I was feeling afraid. I didn't have to shut it down and didn't have to deny it. I actually just noticed it. And I heard the Lord saying, I'm with you. Let's just walk together. You're going to be okay. But even with that, because I had already had that trigger happening, my brain and my body is still feeling the fear and I can't just dismiss it. And I wasn't going to. And in that, actually, this whole other layer of insight. So I chose to stay within that walking along, but I also chose to give myself permission to cut my walk short and head back home. And it became clear to me that fear I was experiencing was tied to the grief I was feeling the day before. Because as I've said before, the lie is you're on your own. Yep. So it shows up as loneliness, grief, overwhelmed, can't cope. It's all on my shoulders. No one's there for me. But it actually also shows up as fear. There's no one to protect me. I'm on my own. I'm defenseless. So it was like so powerful that I had that other layer of experience. So you can see in what I thought was just, okay, I've had this transition. I've had these changes. I'm supposed to grieve. Gillian told me to. I'm blaming you for that. Then all of a sudden, this insight about this, how deeply fear is part of my life. And again, rooted in that old lie, I'm on my own, which has to do with some attachment injuries that I had.
And, Mary, that's what I mean about these layers, like, and sitting with it. Sometimes you don't even know that the layers are interconnected.
Yeah.
Until you're able to take the time and rushing through it and just going, okay, check the box, done. You don't sit with it long enough to see the intricacies of how it's been part of your life, part of your story, and continues to show up in different ways.
Yeah, exactly. And that's basically, what my conclusion was at the end of day 3, when God didn't give me solutions and I didn't plan out my entire life like I like to do, was to be able to just be present to where I'm at right now. And it's going to be a day at a time, a step at a time. I have to let go of the need to control or to solve, because that just reinforces my aloneness again and again. And Jesus was saying to me, no, I'm with you. We're going to do this together. And you don't need to know all that, because this is about trust. This is about faith.
Wow.
Yeah. So like with that, I'm in a open-hearted place, but so much more aware of the various emotions and thoughts that come and go, because I feel like I have given myself permission to untap some of that, because I had it shoved down pretty deeply.
Well, first of all, I'm glad you gave yourself permission. I'm glad you listened to me.
Yes.
Because as a good friend, I wouldn't ask you to do something without it being for you and for your health, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I just felt like I know you too well, that I know that you're so well managed and so well organized, and you can do all the things that you would go in with an outcome in mind, even if you thought you didn't.
Yes.
So I had to kind of remind you to do that. And that's what we should do for each other. Yeah. But wow, what a conversation this has been. I did not expect it to go at all like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you and I haven't caught up with each other. We are going to record a few more episodes, but like I felt like we needed to kind of reconnect, kind of see where we're at. And we decided to hit record. This may become one of the episodes or a bonus episode, but I think it's just us inviting you, sweet listeners, into our life a little bit, hang out with us as we talk. And also that as we encourage you to do the same for yourself, just give yourself the space, give yourself the time to just be present to how you're feeling. And if I can kind of go back to what you were saying, Gillian, about knowing that you've got so many layers and you don't even want to begin to go there, such a great, important boundary. But I would also encourage you as a body-centered type that your body is communicating for you. So even as you're not able to verbalize to me in words or even to yourself, just to hear your body and what it's telling you.
Oh, it's telling me an awful lot.
and just to take care of what your body's telling you, right? That may be the hardest work you're doing right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for listening in, and thank you for sharing, Gillian, and thank you for listening. Well, and we'll see you later.
Okay.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Fully Lived Life podcast. We hope you found it encouraging and helpful. Be sure to follow or subscribe so that you never miss a new episode. And if you enjoyed our show, please help spread the word by sharing with your friends and family and posting on your social media. Thanks for listening, and tune in to our next episode.